Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining Gwinnett County Public Library for our author talk with Nancy Johnson. She's going to be talking about her book, People of Means. It's going to be moderated by Dr. Nzinga Burton. My name is Miriam Mayer, and I'm an adult services specialist for the library. They're going to be in discussion, and then they're going to be taking questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. We also have Bookmiser here with her book, so it is available for purchase and signing. Now I would like to introduce our moderator and author. Dr. Nzinga Burton is an award-winning writer and entrepreneur. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of the award-winning website, The Burton Wire, a news blog covering news of the African diaspora. Former editor-at-large for The Root, Dr. Burton is an expert on the intersection of race, class, gender, sexuality with film, media, and technology. Nancy Johnson is a native of Chicago's South Side. She has worked for more than a decade as an Emmy-nominated award-winning television journalist at CBS and ABC affiliates nationwide. A graduate of Northwestern University and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, she lives in downtown Chicago and manages brand communications for a large nonprofit. Her first book, The Kindest Lie, was a Book of the Month Club selection and a Target Book Club pick. Please welcome Nancy Johnson and Dr. Nzinga Burton.
Well, this is wonderful.
Yes. I'm blown away by all these people here. And I'm not related to anybody here. I don't know. You're right.
We don't
we
know.
might find that out.
We don't know that to be true yet. So we don't. But also this book, just so that you know, was one of People Magazine's most anticipated reads. So Nancy is well known in the literary world. We're very excited that she has a new novel. We can't wait for the next one. We're going to ask about that. We're going to ask about that. And you have a great way of really thinking about the issues that are impacting our communities, but doing it in a way that is developed through the characters.
Right.
So, you know, like this book, I love the intergenerational conflict.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
But let's talk. Let's start. Inspiration. What inspired you to write this book? Why was this your sophomore
Sure.
effort?
Well, first of all, just tell you that People of Means, I don't know how many people have read it already, but yeah, quite a few people have read it, like, yay. It's a story of an upper middle class Black mother and daughter, both of them coming of age at different moments of social and racial reckoning in America. So we meet the mother, Frida, in 1959 when she arrives at Fisk University in Nashville from Chicago. And she's just thrust into this environment where the civil rights and all that is just kicking off. And she's exposed to all these indignities of the Jim Crow South for the very first time as a college student. And she's faced with a dilemma, you know, whether or not she's going to engage in the activism or not. And I don't want to give away any spoilers because there are people who haven't read it. And then there's a love triangle in there. She's pulled between two different men who are pulling her in different directions as it relates to activism. And then 3 decades later, we meet her daughter, Tulip, who is a young public relations professional in Chicago in 1992, and at the time of the acquittal of the 4 officers for the beating of Rodney King. And so she's facing a similar dilemma and choice around what she's going to do related to activism as well. And that's kind of where some of that intergenerational piece comes in. But in terms of the inspiration, I was inspired by the events of the summer of 2020 with the murder of George Floyd. I saw so many people from different walks of life getting involved in activism. And I kept wondering, what is it that spurs people to want to engage in this? And then a few months after the murder of George Floyd, Representative John Lewis died. And I watched a documentary about his life. And here he was, 19 years old, a college student. He was actually at a theological seminary at first before he went to Fisk, but he was also a student at Fisk, right? But before he went there, he was leading the sit-ins at those 5 and dime lunch counters. And I kept thinking, what is it that would motivate someone when you're 19 and you're just trying to figure out, like, we went to college together, Northwestern, a few of us here. But what's it like when you're trying to figure out your class schedule and make friends and date and do all those normal things, but then also leading these sit-ins? And so his life and his early beginnings, because we only know him really, many of us, as the elder statesman. At least that's the way I knew of him. But to think of him as a student at that time, what was it like to be 19? And so that's where the character of Frida came from. That was the inspiration for that. And then for her daughter's character, that being based in 1992, at that particular time, we were in college then, and I don't know if the other Northwestern people participated in but we did march. That was my first time.
Yes, we
you
did.
marched.
We
Rob Dixon, Robin Fleming, those are my classmates from Northwestern. And so, yeah, so that was my first taste of real activism, was at Northwestern, actually marching. And so that's where the piece with Tulip came in. But I didn't want to make Tulip a college student, because I felt like for us marching as college students, for me, the stakes weren't as high as they were, say, for somebody, in Frida's situation in the 50s and the 60s, because so many people were participating in that. But as a young professional, where you're one of the few Black people in your organization and you're taking a stand, and when you're trying to rise up the corporate ladder, I think that's when there was more at risk, more at stake. And so that's why I chose that for the character of Tulip.
Yeah, and I think it's timely now, right?
It is, yes. Everything that we're going through, right, is cyclical. It's very timely.
It's always cyclical. So let's talk about character development. Who is Tulip?
Who is Tulip? You mean like it's Tulip me?
It's Tulip.
You kind of gave me that pointed look.
Tulip, I was like, I'm seeing some.
Oh, you're seeing some similarities. There's some of Tulip. I think anytime you write a novel, some of it is going to be autobiographical in a way. There's pieces of you that you bring to the work, but it's not totally me or my story. But there were some experiences, certainly the microaggressions in the workplace. I experienced that throughout my career. In the 90s is when I was first getting started in the news business. I did 11 years of television news as a reporter. And so there's a scene in there, I don't want to give away too much, but there's a scene where Tulip is at work, and and one of the some of the coworkers are saying some really negative things about her Black boyfriend, some very highly sexualized things. And I had experienced that at a TV station in Wisconsin when I was working there. I went to the company Christmas party in the 90s. Everybody had the money to do the company Christmas party. People don't, so it was very extravagant at a country club. And I brought a Black man date, and I was the only Black person working in the entire station at the time. And I remember going into the bathroom, and these women didn't know I was in there, but they were talking about my Black date, and they were saying I could go for a chocolate popsicle and look at the size of his feet. And, it was just all this highly sexualized.
Mortified.
Yeah, I was mortified, right?
Yes,
and I was
yes.
shocked.
Yes.
Because it was one of my first few jobs out of college, and to have that kind of thing being said, but at that time, people weren't in an uproar when that kind of thing happened. You know what I mean? I had some other racial incidents in my early career too, where they didn't do anything. When I took it to management and nothing happened. Yeah, so those pieces of it were from my life for sure. Some of that, the racial microaggressions, and also just being a daughter too. So I'm not a mother, but there's a lot of in the book with Tulip, her experience as a daughter, and in many ways, as daughters, we never really, I don't think, know our mothers. Like, I'm extremely close to my mother. I mean, she's my best friend in the world and all that. She has Alzheimer's now, but we're very close. But I really know her in relationship to me. I know her as a mother.
Yes.
But I don't think a lot about who was she before I came along, right? When she was a young person and when she was, in her 20s and that kind of thing. And so that's something I wanted to show, just not really knowing who your mother is in many ways and not really understanding her fully.
Yeah, and you did that brilliantly in the book. So what's your approach to character development? Because in the beginning, you dedicated your book to your parents who met, right? Leading the Civil Rights Movement.
Leading the Civil Rights Movement.
Right, but what's your approach to character development?
For me, I really want to get under the skin of the characters, understand their hearts and their minds and their motivations, because it's such a compliment when I have readers tell me I feel like I really know those characters, or when they close the book, they feel like, wow, I wish I could stay in the world of those characters. And so that's something I try to do. And I think it takes a long time. And so I tell people who are writing, and I know there's some writers in the room too, to that over the years, as you're writing and you're developing your characters, you don't know your characters when you first start writing the book. I know on the surface level what they might do,
Yep.
but I don't know them until I've spent, for me, it's, a couple years I've spent with the characters. And then as I am with them day after day on the page, I get to know them, and I get to know this is what he or she would do in this circumstance, or what their motivations would be. And I just want to go below like I said, below the surface level, and really get to know those characters on an intimate level, because then I think they're going to feel real and jump off the page as real people for the reader.
Right. So even though you kind of have this idea of who the characters are, and you kind of learn about them as you tell the story and you develop the story, how did you approach research to, looking at this point of time? I would say even you'd have to do it for the 90s now. I mean, we're in the 2020s, right? But how do
They're starting to call that historical now.
Yes.
The 90s. I'm like, what?
I know. I was like, what? I know,
I'm like,
even
really?
thinking about Rodney King, right?
Yeah.
Because that was like, we were in college, we were marching and doing
We were
stuff.
marching, no justice, no
No
peace.
peace.
No
No
justice,
justice,
no
no
peace. I still remember.
And I was like, wow, that's a historic event.
Yeah.
You're present for it, right? We weren't in LA, obviously,
No.
but you're present for it.
Yes.
And so, like, how
And
do
like
you
researching.
Yeah, how do you research it so that you can give honor to, an illustrious HBCU like Fisk University?
Right,
Like,
right.
What does it take to make sure? Because I know it's heavy. My next question, I have 12 questions in my head right now.
Ah.
One is, how do you do your research? And then the next thing is, what is the weight of representing this
Yeah.
generation of Black people at this illustrious institution in this
Right.
book? Like, why are you the person to do it?
Do that? Yeah, that's a really good question. I definitely felt the pressure of that, the weight of that, because Fisk University is revered. That particular time period, even so, I wasn't alive during the 50s and the 60s. So in some ways, I needed to research. But I think so many of us think we know everything about what that was like because of watching the documentaries, reading about it. So many of us have seen the images on the news of the marches, and we feel like we know everything there is to know about that. And so as I was doing the research, I didn't really read books on it because I felt I'd read enough about the era, but I wanted to talk to people. So again, that was my training as a journalist. So I did interviews with people who were students at that time. And so that's what I did. I interviewed other women. They're in their 80s now, the women that I interviewed who would have been there around the time that Frida was there. And so I wanted to know not just about what the activism was like at that time, but I also was interested in the detail of the era. What did people wear to class? So I wanted to get some of those details right. I know you're nodding. We have a Fisk graduate here on the front row. And so I wanted to know, I was told that some of the professors required women to wear dresses and skirts, and you had to wear pantyhose in some professors' classes. It wasn't everyone, but some of them you had to. I wouldn't have really thought about those things. And someone was the one who told me about no jeans after a certain time of day on 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you're nodding. So it was right. Okay.
And it was still going
It was still, because you look younger than
it was still going on.
Frida. It was still the same. That's so interesting. Yeah. So those kinds of details, it was the research that I did. So I interviewed about 4 women, I think it was, who went to Fisk, and they gave me some of that detail. What was it like to date and just to live life on campus? How did the movement impact your day-to-day life? Because there's a scene where some of the activists are practicing, doing kind of a practicing for nonviolent social change and how to respond in a way, that's nonviolent in terms of civil disobedience. But then at the same time, there's a good-looking guy who's leading the training. And so I wanted to show that they're also checking him out too. That's a funny moment. So when you get to that, when you find it's a name, and they're like, ooh, he looks good. He's hot, right? And so even though it's a serious time, you're also still a young person, and you're going to have the same reactions that any of us would have had on campus if there was a good-looking guy who walked in the room, right? So that was the way I did the research through the interviews. One of the people I talked to of note was the late, great Nikki Giovanni. And so that was amazing. And I definitely felt the weight, as you were asking about, kind of the weight of that history, talking with her, because Nikki had the same publisher that I did. We shared the same publisher, William Morrow HarperCollins. So I was able to ask my editor to get in touch with her editor. and they set up a Zoom call for us. So it was so fun to be on a Zoom call with Nikki Giovanni. I was intimidated though, I'll be honest, because she suffers no fools. She's very
Oh yeah.
tell it like it is,
Yes.
Nikki. And so, like, I would ask some things, and I could tell she's looking like this idiot. Like, what's she doing? Like, and so she told me I needed to go to Fisk. My mom got diagnosed with, like I said, Alzheimer's, but around the time when I was writing the book, so I didn't make it to Fisk. I wasn't doing a lot of travel, but now I have a connection with Fisk, thankfully, and so I'm going to be going there at some point and do some activities there. But it was just great to have Nikki Giovanni's insight. So a lot of the stories that she told me about that time period and some of the hidden history, I told her, I was like, oh my God, I was writing furiously. I said, I'm going to look all this up. I'm going to Google it when we get off the Zoom call. She said, child, you're not going to find this in the history books. And so there were things in there that, I was like, wow. She gave me some really, really great insight. I'm just sorry that, Nikki Giovanni didn't have the opportunity to live to read the book. But the other fun note about Nikki Giovanni is that I just got an email a few weeks ago from the executive producer for Harper Audio, the person who produces the audiobooks for HarperCollins. And because I did the acknowledgement and the author's note and dedication audio for people of means. And so that's how I met this woman. And so she emailed me and said, Nikki Giovanni has a final book coming out this fall called The New Book. So she had written this, so it was already obviously in the work, she had already written it, called The New Book. And for the audio, one of her chapters is entitled Fisk. And so they asked me if I would voice the Fisk chapter. And so I'm so honored,
That's fantastic.
I was like, oh my goodness. So I get to do it next month, go to a recording studio in Chicago and voice her chapter about Fisk. Yeah, so I'm just like, wow.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, full circle, right? So you talked about it a little bit, but what... one of the things I love about the book is that you do marry activism with Black joy.
Oh.
So can you talk about, and I know some people haven't read it, but can you talk about the importance of highlighting, the fun moments or the Black joy that you see in the book when you're dealing with
something heavy and painful?
I
think it's so important to have Black joy. I think those of us who are Black authors, we often experience this in the publishing industry. Vanessa Riley, well-known author, just walked in the room, Claire. And so we talk about some of these issues quite often. I think in publishing, sometimes they're looking for Black pain, right? Oh, let's write about slavery. Let's write about, those moments of Black struggle. But we are more than our struggles, for sure. And I think the way that we have endured and continue to endure has been through these moments of joy, finding joy. Some people wonder right now why so many people are doing the song with the fans right now. They're like, boots on the ground, right? Like, how can they do that when democracy is at stake, right? Like, well, if you've been in the 92%, maybe, we wouldn't have to. But anyway, I digress, sorry.
That's okay.
But
that's okay.
Yeah. So I think, so that's an example of us still finding joy, right? During these heavy moments. And that's why I gave that example of, Frida and her friends, her girlfriends, seeing a good looking guy and, having that moment of levity. And you see those moments of fun and joy. Same thing in Tulip's storyline too, where they go out or they're chilling at home and, having a drink and, listening to music and just having moments of joy. And then Frida, there's times when she's lying on the bed laughing until her belly hurts with her girlfriends. And that's what's real because we're always going to have the joy. And that's what gets us through the hard times is the joy. Yeah. And we have to remember to make time for that.
So the characters, the symbolism, like when I think about the Mother Gaines character.
Mother Gaines was the house mother. That was something I learned about. I mean, I'd heard of that, but I learned that from talking to some of the graduates.
Right. And then all of the girls were from different parts. Like, and I immediately thought of the Great Migration. Oh. Right, because you have the Southerners, you have the Northerners, and how they learned to coexist.
Right.
But is that intentional? Was that intentional?
I
Or
don't
is that
think it was
something that just
intentional. I
happened?
think it just kind of happened organically as I was writing it. I am always interested, same thing in The Kindest Lie, my first novel, in writing different perspectives. That's what people who read, my books think that I do pretty well, is showing that we're not a monolith and that there are a lot of different experiences of being Black and what Blackness looks like in terms of different socioeconomic backgrounds, people from different parts of the country. So I think that's really important to show that. And also to your question before, I sometimes feel this weight of how I represent us just as a people, as Black people. Sometimes I feel the pressure of representing us well, and that can be a burden. That can be really difficult as you're writing because then it's limiting your creativity. If you're thinking about what is somebody at home thinking about this. I went through it a lot with the first book where I had a Black man, Eli, the character of Eli, the brother of my main character who's just lost his job at the factory and was, out of work and spending a lot of time at the bar drinking. And I'm like, oh God, he's kind of a bit of a deadbeat. He does love his kids though, but I'm like, is this a bad representation? And then my main character in that book, Ruth, had a baby out of wedlock at 17. And I started wondering and questioning, am I perpetuating a stereotype? But I remember asking that question at a book event of Britt Bennett. We were just talking about Britt Bennett earlier, who wrote The Vanishing Half and The Mothers. And she said she tries not to worry about that because as long as you create characters that are complex and multidimensional, it's fine because there are so many, again, ways to be Black, but as long as I'm showing them in their fullness, that doesn't matter. But I think we feel the pressure sometimes as Black authors because there aren't as many positive representations out there in media of Blackness. Whereas a white character, you've got enough representations that you can have a deadbeat dad, you can have a mother, a woman who's a mother at 17. But so these are some of the things that I think about when I'm writing, but I think I'm beyond that now in creating these characters. Yeah. But you do worry about the reader and what they're thinking. And so like I had in The Kindest Lie, it was a story of Ruth, the successful Black engineer, and Midnight, this poor young white boy.
Yes.
And then this was when I started reading Goodreads reviews. I was just telling Anissa before, I don't read my Goodreads reviews anymore because they can mess you up.
I was like, don't read the reviews.
Right?
Don't read the reviews.
There was a Black woman in the reviews who said, oh, she must not like Black folks. And so that's why she put a white, kid in the book, right? Like, cause she's, not really Black enough. And so those kinds of things that you just can't win, you know what I mean? Like it had nothing to do with not being Black enough, right?
Yeah,
that's just the way I thought was the best way for me to tell the story I was trying to tell.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the reviews
those
can be
reviews
brutal.
can really mess you up.
Yeah, so you let your friends read them and pick out the good
Pick out the good ones,
and send those to you.
And the good ones exceed the bad ones, but a lot of times that one bad one gets in your head.
Yes.
And then when that gets in my head, it's like I can't write for weeks because I'm thinking about that review. Yeah.
So speaking of which, what is your writing process for the writers in the room? Like, how do you?
And there are writers here. Yes. Michael Andrews, one of my friends, he's writing a memoir. So you definitely, it's dealing with race and identity and family. So at some point that'll be out in the world and you'll want to read it. Michael Andrews. So for me, my writing process, I think it's evolved. You usually hear writers talk about whether they are plotters, like where you plot your book out and outline it, or you're a pantser where you write by the seat of your pants. I'm definitely more of the latter, more letting the story evolve. That's the way I tend to write and not plotting it out. But for the second book, For People of Means, my editor at HarperCollins wanted an early draft of it. I think I was only like 50, 60 pages in. She said, I just want to see where you're going with it. And so usually people don't share that early of a draft with their editor. Vanessa, you're nodding like I probably shouldn't have done that, huh? But I did send it to my editor. And usually she's really positive in her notes, but this time she sent a note back. There were no smiley faces or emojis or anything. And she's like, we need to talk. And so I was like, oh, crap. She thinks it sucks. And so we got on a call and she said, Nancy, what's your process? Similar to your question. And that's when I told her, well, I let the characters speak to me and the story evolves. And she said, I'm going to need you to outline. Because she felt the story in those early 50, 60 pages felt episodic, like just a lot of different scenes, but they didn't feel as connected as an actual story, and you want it to be a story.
Yep.
But then I was early, though. It was so early in drafting, right? And so I hadn't gotten there. That's my excuse, at least.
Right.
But at least she was able to tell me what she wanted. And so I got with one of my author friends, Allison Hammer, we know, and she gave me this outline method that she uses. And so I wrote a 10-page outline. I had never written a book outline before. Vanessa, I know outlines, I think. Yes, right, or somewhat, yes. But that wasn't my thing. You don't ever show the trash phase? Never show the trash phase of the book, she said. So I turned in that outline to my editor, and then at that point she said, "Oh, I love it. I'm on board again." And she said, "I like the way we're going." And so then I used it to get started, but then I like to say I was able to dream the rest of the way. And so I kind of threw it out, and I let the story, because again, like I said, the characters do speak to me, and they do evolve, and I get to know my relationship with the characters deepens as I continue to write and rewrite. And so then the story goes in whatever direction that the characters take me in, is the way I think about it. So I am more of a linear writer. I don't write it like, I'll write the ending first and then write the middle, so I write from start to finish in one draft, and then I go back and I rewrite. And that's where the real writing happens, is in revision. So I will say that to you, Michael. It's, the revision is, there's nothing wasted either, I would say. You might begin your novel in one place, or your memoir in one place, and then as the story evolves, you realize, no, that's not the true beginning of the book, right? And the beginning is someplace else, right? Because sometimes the beginning of your novel is the throat clearing process, where you're just kind of figuring the story out for yourself.
Yep.
But that may not be the true beginning of the book, right? Because you don't want people to get bored in that period where you're just trying to clear your throat, right? You want it to be at a moment that's going to be impactful for the reader. And then thinking about the climax, I spent a lot of time on that part of the book too. And then the ending, right? You want to have an ending. I try to work on an ending that feels inevitable, but that's not wrapping everything up neatly with a bow. I don't like, that's just me. Some people do those, neat endings.
Yeah.
Some people do get frustrated with, well, oh gosh, I want to know everything about what happened to these characters. And I give you resolution to the story, but it's still open enough that you can figure out for yourself where you decide for yourself where the characters go from here. So when I do book clubs, people are always asking, well, what happened with this? So what really happened there? Where did they go next? And I say, where do you think they went next? And so it helps them to imagine the next evolution of the story. So that's my process in terms of the writing. But when I write, I work a full-time job. I always think it's important in my books and in real life to talk about how people make their money.
Yes.
I get frustrated when I read books where I don't know how these people make their money. So it's just a reality to me. And so that's always in my books. But then again, I'm also looking at class as well as race in my novels. But I work a full-time job, as you heard, in corporate communications. I only have one income, so I have to work. I think sometimes people think that, authors are always off in the woods creating and doing nothing else. But I know it's a demanding day job that I have. I remember doing a writing conference once where I met Dennis Lehane, the crime fiction author. I love his work, love his writing. And he said he always had jobs. Well, now he doesn't have to have another job because he's
Dennis
rich.
Lehane.
He's Dennis Lehane, right? He makes movies and writes books. But anyway, he said back in the day, he said, I never wanted a job like yours, Nancy, where it saps your creativity because I'm writing in my day job. You know what I mean?
Right.
So he told me he was a grave digger. He was a limo driver. So had those jobs where your brain wasn't being consumed with those things and you could have the space to be creative.
Yes.
And so, but for me, got this demanding day job. Before the pandemic, I was driving into the office all the time. And so with a driving commute, you can't write. And I would always think I'm going to remember the dialogue or the exposition or whatever when I get to the office. And of course I would forget when I got to the office. And so what I started doing was using the voice memo function on my phone as I was driving. And then I had to speak into that. And then I would have some of the things, that I'm thinking of along the way. I also have an accountability partner out in LA. She's a writer. She's going to be self-publishing a book. Well, I'm sorry, no, small publisher, not self-publishing. And so what we would do is I would come home from work, get home around 6. We would talk at 6:30, and then we would talk for a few minutes about this is what we're going to do for the next 2 hours of writing. And then we would write for 2 hours, and at the end of that 2-hour period, I'd call her back, and we would say, here's what we accomplished during that time. And so that helped tremendously. We also do it on Sundays, pretty regularly on Sundays that we do that accountability. Only once did I talk to her in that, in the beginning of the call, and I said, okay, I'm about to go write for 2 hours. And it was after work. I was tired. I went to bed. I went to sleep for 2 hours. I set my alarm, and I called her back, and I was like, oh yeah, I got quite a bit accomplished. I didn't lie, right? I got my sleep in. I accomplished something. And it was years later before I told her about that I did that one time.
Well,
but yeah.
And that is the piece about writing. When people ask you, what does it take to be a writer?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what type of writing that you do. You're a screenwriter, you're a novelist, you're writing memoirs, historian, whatever. You write every day.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you
Well,
don't,
not only, but you don't have to write every day. I think that's the other thing. Some writers will tell you to always write every day. It's a good discipline and habit. I think you have to have some kind of a writing discipline. And I think that's important, but it doesn't have to be every day. It could be every other day. There are some times that I'm only writing, like right now, I'm not working on writing another book at the moment. So I'm not writing anything every day. But when I'm in the middle of writing a book, when I get to the home stretch, I'm writing every day. But other times I might only be writing on the weekends.
do you do other types of writing though?
I do essay writing. I love essay writing. And so that's something that I have done as a published author, where you get asked to write an essay, that accompanies the book, that kind of thing. Not accompanies it, but it's out in the marketplace to help promote the book. And I do love that. In terms of like a next thing I'm thinking about, I haven't told many people I'm thinking about this, but I haven't even told my agent I'm thinking about it, but or my editor, I haven't told. I'm thinking about nonfiction too. Jumping into that. Vanessa knows that I've talked to her about that. So just thinking about ideas about how I can kind of merge my fiction. I want to continue writing novels, so doing fiction, but I'd also like to incorporate nonfiction into there as well. And I think part of the idea from that came from in talking to groups. I've done some speeches, keynote speeches and such, and so many people feel inspired, when I start telling things about my own background and my story. That I'm like, I may want to write something. I might have a story to tell in nonfiction and be able to help people in new ways and inspire them.
Well, that's what's great about your stories is the history. I mean, I'm a historian, so
Yeah.
I love the historic part of
Right.
it, and just like really being able to visualize and think about and see yourself in these particular spaces at these particular moments.
Yeah.
You're very good at that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. Girl,
Did we say we went to school together?
Yes, we
say
did.
that.
We
Okay,
did.
okay, I forget.
Yeah, and we're sorors. But
And we're
whatever. But I
sorors.
would have told her that before.
Yeah, right. She's not just saying it.
No, I'm not. I'm not
I said, even though we got a big Delta contingent in the house, though.
yes,
we
yes,
love
yes.
the Deltas.
Yes.
As well. Okay, she's like, yes, another Delta.
Okay, so talk about, and then we're going to take questions. So get your questions ready, people.
Yeah.
But I do want to know about the parallels between your life and this book in particular, because like I think with the Kindest Lie, when I read that, I was like, Nancy wrote this.
Oh, interesting.
But when I read this, I was like, Nancy's in this.
Oh, in what way? You have to tell me, because I don't know if I'm in it.
I know. I want to, if that was intentional or if you, what, in your mind?
In my mind.
What are your
Okay, then I want to hear from you.
parallels?
What
Okay.
do you see
Yeah.
as, I think the living the life of, so with Frida, that character, she comes from Chicago and from more of a sheltered background. I was definitely sheltered as a child, and then she's an only child, so that's also partly my story, and not really always knowing how the world works until you get out there in it and you're faced with it, and trying to find your voice, find yourself. So I think in this book there's a lot of her evolving into who she really is and making her own choices, and that's a big part of who I am and my story. Also, I'm very close to my parents. My father died in 2008. So, of course, he didn't get to see me become an author. He didn't even know that was on the horizon for me. So that's difficult, for me. And to have lost him before he got to see this all happen. But there were always so many expectations from both him and my mother for my life. And so a big part of both The Kindest Lie and People of Means deals with family expectations, because that's always something I'm wrestling with, trying to live up to who my parents want me to be in the world, right? And then trying to do that and live that out, but also trying to find my own way. And how can I be true to me, to myself as well? So that's something I'm always grappling with. And then I know we already talked about Tulip and some of the things with the workplace experiences and the racial microaggressions and all of that. Also, there's some TV news in there. I worked in TV news for 11 years. So, because she's in public relations, but she's interacting with, obviously, with news media, doing media relations. And so that's also a part of me. But what were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking that, I mean, definitely the Tulip character, but I was also thinking about, the publishing world is kind of a microcosm of like a PWI or
Oh,
mainstream society.
yeah.
And
Predominantly white institution.
predominantly ways, and how some of the challenges you face, and I know you face some, and I face some as well, in these environments where
Yes.
people are trying to, I call it testing your gangster.
Texting your
But,
gangster. I like it. Texting
Testing
your
your
gangster.
And really the resilience it requires, even though we had a strong Black and I think very uplifting Black community at Northwestern, and being an extension of Chicago, it was.
But there was some racism I went through there that I'm not going to get into the details of that.
Yeah.
But that I'm thinking about putting into a nonfiction.
Yes, and that's what I was thinking about. So
Stay tuned.
I'm seeing those pieces of you as well, right? And then of course the only child, and I saw that as well. And then the fact that you dedicated it to your parents. And then I was thinking, I do have a question. Did your dad know that you wanted to be an author, a novelist?
He didn't know that I wanted to be a novelist. I never told him that. And I think I always kind of had that in my mind, but I never expressed that. So when I went to Northwestern, my father was the one who, he was kind of the most strong-willed of the two, of my mother and father. She was more mild-mannered like me, and but he was one who was like, you need to be an engineer. So he wanted me to be an engineer so badly, but I didn't. I mean, I didn't have any kind of affinity for math and science, and I think that may be why I made Ruth an engineer in my first book. She was a chemical engineer. And also, you don't see a lot of Black characters in those STEM fields in novels. You see a lot of attorneys and that kind of thing. And you do see physicians, but you don't see engineers, for example. But that's what he wanted me to do, because I remember there was a young man we were graduating with at Northwestern who was going to come out and make, I think it was $60,000 a year. And I was so like, oh my God, you all know who he is, but I was like, he's going to make $60,000. And I started out, as a journalist in TV making like $13,000 a year. So that's why, and they were keeping me at 39 hours a week so they didn't have to pay me benefits.
Right.
So that's why my father's like, you need to, but the beautiful thing about my dad was that once he realized this was my dream to go into journalism, he kept saying, if I could buy a TV station and put you in it, I would. You know what I mean? And he told me, don't worry about it. He said, even if you have to go work somewhere with no pay, we'll pay, to set you up in an apartment and take care of everything, So, so I have the best parents in the world, both of them so supportive, but always that like weight of what they want from my life is always something I carry with me. And there's a positive too. I don't want to sound like only a negative weight. It's kind of what I tried to show with Frida at Fisk, just the feeling of being at this esteemed institution that you're coming from this long tradition of excellence. And even though it can be a burden at times, because there's a lot to live up to, it's also something to feel proud of and to stick your chest out about, that I'm part of this greatness. This, Frida's father said to her when he sent her off, you're part of this great Negro aristocracy now, And that's a good feeling to know you are part of that, right? It's just such a wonderful, you come from good stock.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we're going to take some questions.
Okay.
This was wonderful.
Yes, this was.
We're going to take some questions from the audience.
Sorry.
I mean, I can ask more, but yes.
It's not really a question, but I just wanted to thank you for your words and our current situation in our country and so many things being pushed aside and erased. We need the documentation.
We really do. Thank you. I'm glad you said that because I think you talk about historical fiction. That's why it is so important that we are telling these stories because there are so many people who are trying to erase these stories. We know that. That's why libraries are so important. The woman who's the librarian for the Congress was just fired. Library of Congress was just fired. There's cuts in funding for libraries. They're banning books. So we're in such a really difficult time right now. And this is the time when, and I can't remember who said it, if it was Toni Morrison or someone else, but this is when the artists get to work, right? When we are in times of struggle like this. This is, yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it.
I like to talk about character names, and I like to know the process of how do you select these names. Frida's an old school name, but then Tulip, and just what is the process for
I know they just kind of come to me, but once I think of it,
do you struggle with making them less or more ethnic, or
that's a really good one too. I hadn't thought a lot about the more ethnic names, but I'm trying to think. Well, I don't know if Darius is considered. Is that ethnic? A little bit.
Yes.
A little bit.
I immediately thought of Love Jones. But
Oh,
anyway,
did you?
go ahead.
Okay, yes. That's probably what was in my head because I love Love Jones. But it's so funny. It depends on the audience you talk to. So I did a book club. It was an all-white women's book club, and they were all saying Darius. Is how they all pronounced the name was Darius, and I pronounced it Darius. But it just depends on your perspective, how you see names. But Frida, I have a cousin. She's deceased now, but an elderly cousin. And I thought it was a little more old school of a name. And so I thought of her. And then I also thought I could play on freedom because there's a part where her love interest, Darius, says to her, Frida, sounds a lot like freedom to me. And I was like, oh, that's sexy and romantic. So I was like, yeah. So those kinds of things I think about. Tulip, I love the flower. And in the apartment building where I grew up, there's a bed of tulips. And then I was able to, so I just came up with that because I like the name. But then it also, you can think about growth and, a flower, expansion of a flower, the growth. And then I was able to, I won't give that away, but there's a way I was able to work that name into the novel in a way that was very interesting. I'll just say that. I won't say more.
Having never been to Fisk, how did you get the description of Jubilee Hall and the grand staircase and the back door that they were sneaking in and out of?
Yeah, it was just from talking to the people who were students there. And any errors that I made, they were mine, So I talked to, multiple students. Some people had some conflicting information, to be honest. So I was like, well, I don't know, but it's everybody's memory, the way they remember the things there. But yeah, that was all from talking with students to give me those details. There was some train travel there with passing some information via the train travel as part of the movement that I got from Nikki Giovanni. So I gave her that plot point because that was a plot point I was really worried about. And I said, how would this have happened? And then she was like, oh, this is what she would have used her boyfriend and he would have had connections with the rails. And this is how that would have happened. And so she was so helpful with that. So that's how I did that, not having been there. And then I did look at some things online. I did read some things about Jubilee Hall as well. And the painting that was there and about the staircase and looked up as many photos as I could as well. But it was a lot for not going there in person.
It was a great description.
Yeah.
It really is. Like you've been there.
Yeah. And so then I just talked to this woman from Fisk. I don't know, did I mention already that I'm going to be doing something, an event with Fisk. And so I was talking to their chief of staff and Dr. Thompson. And she said, when I come, I need to do a tour of Jubilee Hall because they do tours and they point out the bedroom that Nikki Giovanni slept in. Now, so that's part of the tour, isn't it? Something like she's like part of the history in that way. And were you going to say something about that?
You really described Jubilee Hall to a T. Yes, that when I was a student there, seniors lived in Jubilee Hall.
Okay, not freshmen.
Not freshmen. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know. May have been in the 50s.
Yeah, apparently then that was the freshman dorm.
That may have been the freshman.
And then they went to Livingston, and then Rob Dixon, you were saying Which one? Your parents went there.
Both of my parents attended there, but my mother was a transfer student, so she arrived at Fisk her sophomore year. My father was there freshman year on, but she was in that dorm, Jubilee Hall, as a sophomore with other freshmen, and then later went to Livingston. So back then, she was there, like I told you, a decade before your care.
Okay.
My father got there to Fisk in 49, my mother made it there in 50, but they both finished in 53. So a full decade before that. And the crazy thing is, my grandmother was a dorm mother here at Clark College.
Wow.
And so I can often remember telling the stories that my grandmother would share about my mother and wanting to make sure that she was on the straight and narrow and not participating in anything that would get her in trouble. Or get her killed.
Yes.
So, I mean,
Yes.
those parallels were just amazing. And I just wanted to say that in speaking with my parents about their experience in Fisk a full decade before your characters, there were parallels.
There was parallels and it was
Yeah,
tracking.
and to see that Fisk has not changed very much either, I think too, it's very interesting is that because when I was there, it was still the rule of no pants. That is absolutely true.
Wow.
You could not wear pants in the cafeteria. You could only wear pants a certain number of hours on a Saturday. You know,
Yeah.
you really couldn't go into downtown alone. And we did have a house mother. She was Mrs. Sims. And
Okay.
you described Mrs. Sims to a T.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I'm glad. Mama Sims, my mother Gaines. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And then I think the lady behind had a question. Dina, is that?
Yes. Okay, so how do you prepare when you're writing? Do you write in silence or do you write with like some type of, I wouldn't say like distraction, but like things going on in the background? Because Michael write in silence. I write with music. And I write, like when I'm writing certain scenes, if it's something that's very sentimental, I'm usually playing my Luther Vandross or something. But if I'm writing, and if it's something that's more, I would say more like action thrill, I'm usually will like play certain type of like, yeah, you know, hip hop or something like that to get my energy going. But I wanted to know, like, do you write in silence or are you, how?
I actually do both. I write a lot in coffee shops. Sometimes when I'm alone, I write alone as well, and when it's quiet. But sometimes I like to have the TV on, but the volume down though. But I like to just see the activity and have some company in the room. But a lot of times I'm writing in coffee shops. I think some of this comes from my news background. I'm accustomed to being able to write in environments where there are things going on around me. Because I have to, I'm on deadline and there are people around. But coffee shops are good because I'm able to kind of tune out the noise. It kind of becomes white noise, that noise of the different machines when they're making the drinks in, a Starbucks or another coffee shop. And even conversation around me, unless somebody's sitting right next to me having a conversation, that I can't do. I can't concentrate because then I'm listening. But and thinking about how am I going to put you in my next book, right? Right. That's how Tayari Jones got her American Marriage Story, because she was overhearing a couple having an argument. Yep, at the mall. Yep, and so that's how she came up with that book. So you never know what you're going to get. But for me, I just like to. I can do either way, silence, or I can have a din of noise, but not anything really too in my face and too concentrated in my ear. And then also getting motivated to get started. Sometimes I will read a passage of some book that I like, or read a little poetry. Sometimes I need to get in the spirit of the creative spirit. I can't always just sit down and start writing. Yeah, I don't know about you, but yeah.
I cannot do that.
It's gotta be quiet.
I have to have.
You gotta have it all
That
quiet.
to get me going.
Was in
Yeah.
whoever, I'll let
So
you.
Nancy,
Yes,
first of all, this is a masterpiece. This is an amazing book.
thank you.
How did you, growing up in the 90s and singer, she mentioned it is kind of like ancient history at this point. I hope it isn't. I think I'm still young. But the 90s was a flowering. It was really the golden age, a lot for music and culture. you highlighted that so well in here. You talked about remember the sob, you talked about the low end Chicago references.
Yeah.
What else did you say in there? You were talking, well, the Bulls, of course, in the 90s, and you were talking
You were listening to hip hop,
Chuck Rock and all that stuff.
Chuck Rock.
You were deliberate with that, but what about Latasha Harlins? That hit me. Me and Dina talk about her a lot. When we think about the 90s, a lot of times we talk about Rodney King before we talk about Latasha Harlins.
Yeah.
And you putting that in a book, was that deliberate?
That was
To put in
deliberate.
her book? Because we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah, that was deliberate because I think, a lot of times the stories of women don't get the same attention. I remember we did it with Breonna Taylor. We were like, what about her?
Right,
Because
right.
we were talking so much about the men who became hashtags, and all of them deserve, to be recognized. And so I thought, once I thought about wanting to incorporate Latasha, I thought that can be part of the story in that, in that particular timeline, that they can have a conversation about what about her? You know what I mean? The women can rise up and be like, what about us? Right? And so I just thought that was an important piece of the activism, to talk about the role of women and our lives and our bodies being just as valid and worthwhile and worthy of protest. Yeah, but thank you. Sorry.
I'd like to know, how did you settle on the title People of Means?
yeah.
Because growing up, within the Black culture, there, always, we look at the Fisk people, they were the people of means, but this other group, there's another group. How did you do?
Yeah, once I decided I wanted to write about Black people from upper income, I thought on its surface we think of them as being people of means. I also thought it was a major flex to call Black people people of means as the title of a book. So I remember when I announced the title of this book, some of the Black authors on Instagram were like, I like that, that's right. You know what I mean? Because usually people of means, people often think of someone white. And so that was one thing. But then I always like a title that has multiple layers of meaning. And so the other piece is that I believe that if we have the capacity to love and to unite, right, and to live out our purpose, our why in the world, then we are all people of means. So I felt like it was a kind of a rallying cry for everybody, a sense of empowerment that we are people of means. And when I define people of means in the book, I define it in the novel, actually, but I define it when I'm talking about Darius, who is not from, he's the son of sharecroppers and all that, right? And but he comes from this family where their parents, they worked hard, they worked with their hands, but they were able to have all their kids like make something of themselves and do these things. So by that definition, they were people of means as well, even though they didn't have the material wealth. Their wealth was in their children. Their wealth was in the legacy that they left behind and their belief of what they wanted them to be. And then that's the other thing that makes me also think about the Pullman Porters play a role in this book too, when you read it. And so I remember when I turned this book in, my editor said, because I had this man, Jonas was the Pullman Porter in the book, and my editor said, would he have had kids, like a Black man like that? Would he have had kids in college, you think? I was like, oh yeah, that was a big thing with the Pullman Porters. That was, a creme de la creme. They had the kind of money and wealth to be able to send their kids to college. And so they were really responsible, the Pullman Porters were, for helping the Black middle class to rise, right? And so, but that's an education for people who don't know about that. And so that's the nice thing about historical fiction, that we can really educate people. Somebody, yes.
Yes. Hi, Nancy Johnson. My name is Gwendolyn West. I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana. So I'm not too far from Illinois, from where you, but I did have the opportunity to meet Gwendolyn Brooks at Butler University, where I attended. But my question is to you. Have you ever thought about taking your gift of writing and transferring it into movies? Because Tyler Perry is here. Yes, and I did work with his
him?
Well,
Can you make an introduction? I know.
Well, his mentor. I worked with William Reynolds, who was the one that started the soap operas. And he also collaborated with Tyler Perry on Hidden Figures, which was my It was sort of a biography of my cousin, Dr. Gladys West.
Okay.
Okay. She's living, of course, in Virginia. She's 94 years old.
Nice.
So he did collaborate with Tyler Perry on that and The Family That Prays and several other films.
Yes.
But what my suggestion is to you, that Tyler Perry would be more than glad to take your works and put it into movies. He's always, seeking new talent.
Okay.
I started something before William Perry, I don't know, William Reynolds passed away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I
But afterwards, I'm gonna give you some things.
Yes, please do. Give me the. Yes, please put me in touch. Okay, now I see Vanessa's trying to get hers in too. Vanessa's like, I'm sitting next to her.
I give God all the praise.
No, I do too.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
But,
Your lips to God's ears. But but to answer your question,
Yes.
thank you for that.
Yes.
I am interested in that in both my novels, The Kindest Lie and People of Means, having developed. I'm looking now for a new film agent. I had a film agent, but I'm trying to look for a different one. I'm making a transition to a new film agent. So that's something I definitely would love.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
We have time for one
Oh,
more
yeah,
question.
and then
That's our
somebody else
last
over here.
question.
I was going to ask, just real quickly, I know you mentioned certain institutions such as Jack and Jill and the Lynx in your novels. What is your connection, or how did you get those references into your novel? Or why did you choose to?
Or why did I
make them?
choose to? Yeah, so I'm not a part of either one of those, but growing up, I was not in Jack and Jill, but I always had friends who were in Jack and Jill, so I would go to the Jack and Jill activities. When I was early in my news career, I emceed a few Lynx events in Wisconsin when I started there, and I think one in Florida when I was reporting there too. So I definitely know about these. These are definitely our legacy Black organizations. And in trying to write about issues of class, I thought it was important to put some of those books in there and to give that perspective, to talk about privilege and what that looks like in our community. And I just think that's important. As I also think it speaks to, at least with Frida and her parents, they were really about, it wasn't the Lynx for them, but the NAACP, the Urban League. And then I think in the 90s storyline, we were talking about the Lynx and Jack and Jill, but talking about there's a way to do things, there's a way to be excellent and to make change. And for some in the Black community, that way is to go through those legacy organizations, that that's the way to do it. Your fraternities and your sororities, all of that is, as opposed to the boots on the ground, grassroots activism that you were seeing at the Ida B. Wells projects that you see in my book. You know what I mean? Just different ideas about how to do that and how to think about privilege. Because in the storyline with Tula, her boyfriend, Keyshawn, is a bus driver, city bus driver. And she's talking about all this activism, and he's telling her basically that it's a privilege, for you to be able to even engage in that. I'm just trying to make ends meet, right? We're just trying to survive. His father had been in prison before, and they're just trying to make it in this world, and that they don't have the luxury of being able to do that. And so, just bringing up those organizations, those legacy ones, was just a way to talk about privilege and wealth within our community.
Very good.
This was such a nice crowd, and
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
Yay, you all.